Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today you're responsible for one of the oldest champagne houses where you'll be producing and selling wine all over Europe and even to the other side of the Atlantic. You'll be harvesting, pressing in the cellar, setting up your logistics, and making sales. Dom Pierre is for 2 to 4 players, takes 1 to 2 hours to play. It's for ages 12 and up, and published by R&R Games. Now if you've ever heard of the Dom Pierre champagne, this is who created it, as his full name is Dom Pierre Perignon. Today I'll be doing a rule school where I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now I've placed timestamps below me in the description of this video just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Now this game is on Kickstarter right now, and that campaign page link is below as well. You can click that to see more. Well, without further ado, let's get started. In Dom Pierre, you're trying to have the most points by creating the best champagne and gaining prestige. You'll be going to the vineyard and planting grapes, but also harvesting depending on which grapes are around it. And once you have those grapes in your presses, you can press them in the cellar and creating either bottles or barrels. That's important because selling them to certain markets, some of them only want bottles, and they're better if they come out of one of your other presses. Others might only want barrels, and some can take either. And it has an interesting action selection mechanism as you're selecting an action. Cost has to do with the lowest of where you are, and strength has to do with where you are on that action. So as the game goes on, things become more costly, but you get more powerful too. You're also trying to fulfill certain goals throughout the game, and you're also trying to work your way up the prestige track, either buying your way up or doing certain things with excellence. Because not only do these give you straight points at the end of the game, they help you multiply other things you've collected throughout the game to give you even more points. So let's see if you have what it takes to become the best champagne house around. To set up, you're going to place the main board in the middle of the table. Next, off to the side, you're going to place the prestige board. Then you're going to find prestige tokens that look like this. You're going to shuffle them all up, and you're going to place a number of these in this glass, face down, equal to 4 times the number of players, but it's also written here. For example, for a 3-player game, we place 12 of them face down. Any ones not used in this game can be placed back in the box. Then you'll randomly flip over 3 of those tokens. On the left side of the main board, you'll see spots to place champagne tokens depending on their value. This is printed right on the board, as you can see. So you'll place those tokens right on the imprinted part of the board with the corresponding numbers. Now these tokens are double-sided. They have bottles on one side and barrels on the other. It doesn't matter which ones are face up as long as the right values are on the right valued spots on the board. In the bottom right hand corner of the board, you're going to place all of the gray accessory tokens. Now there's only 4 types, so I've stacked them like this. You can leave them in a big pile if you want. I also have placed the coins of values 1 and 5. You're going to take 1 value 1 coin and 1 of each of the 4 different types of gray accessory tokens. Now on the vineyard in the board, you'll see different player count numbers. You're going to take those 5 tokens, which is the 4 accessory tokens and the 1 coin. You're going to shuffle them up and place them 1 each on the player count that you're playing with. So in a 3-player game, it might look something like this. Next, you're going to find the different harvest tiles. There's 3 different types as denoted by the types of grapes listed here, and you're going to separate them out by type. You don't have to separate them out by number like I've done here, all nice and neat. You can just separate them out by type if you want. But for each type, you're going to grab 1 harvest tile of level 3 and level 2. So there'll be 1 of these and 1 of these, 1 of these and 1 of these, and 1 of these and 1 of these. So a total of 6 tiles. Now in the middle of the board in the village area, you'll see 2 spots that will house those different tokens. You're going to shuffle those up and place 3 of them in each of those so they're even stacks. Next, you'll see 2 spots for blue accessory tokens. You'll shuffle up those 16 accessory tokens and place them so that there's 8 on each stack. You want to put them face up so it has the points on top. Next, you're going to find the 4 different market decks. They look like this, and each of them have a different colored outline. You want to put them in stacks so that all of them are from the same area, meaning they all have the same colored outline on the outside. Now, if you're playing a 2-player game, each of those decks you'll go through and you'll remove every card that has the 2-player X symbol on it. There should be 5 cards in each of those decks that you'll be removing. And each of those decks correspond with spots on the board with also those colored outlines. So once you've shuffled each of those decks, You put each deck completely face up in the corresponding spot, and recognizing that the color of the outline is the color of the banner of the word on that specific deck. Next, you're going to get the ratio tiles. There's 5 of them, and I want to point out that they are double-sided, and this is important because you're going to randomize these by shuffling them and flipping them like a coin, but you're only going to use 4 of these. So you are going to flip them like a coin and place them to the left of each of the different market cards. You'll have 1 left over that you place back in the box. Next, you're going to find the gold cards. The backs look like this, the fronts look like this. If you're playing a 2-player game, you're going to remove all the cards with the 2-player X symbol on it like that. There should be 10 of those cards. You'll make sure that deck is shuffled well, and then you will place 5 cards face up to the right of the board like this. Next, you'll find the grapes. You're going to take 1 of each of the varieties, which essentially is 1 of each of the different colors here. And you'll notice in the vineyard, there is a starting spot for each of those types of grapes. And so you'll place them on those starting spots. You'll place the rest of those grapes in the bag and give it a good shake. Then you'll randomly draw 1 more grape and place it right on the question mark slot in the vineyard. Next, you'll place all these tokens to the side of the board as well. They're all double-sided. We have modifier tokens, flags, and 100/200 point tokens. Next, we're going to set up the players. Each player is going to select a player board. They're slightly different in the way they look, but they operate all the same way. You're going to make sure you place it on the A side that is listed in the upper right-hand corner of the board. Then each player is going to select a color, and they're going to place the small discs in the bottom row with the arrows right there. They'll place 1 of their workers in the bottom of their wine press. Each player will then place the rest of their workers in the indicated spots on the board. If you're playing a 2-player game, notice on the roads there's little spots that have the 2-player symbol on there. Take a color that's not being used, and you would fill those spots up with 1 of those non-used colors. Each player will place 1 of their score markers on the 0-point track in the upper left of the board, and on the bottom right of the prestige board. Next, everyone will take a value 3 champagne tile and place it on their leftmost press like this, making sure it's barrel side up, because remember these are double-sided. They have bottles on one side and barrels on the other. Next, from the harvest tiles, you're going to take 2 value 1s of each of the 3 types, so a total of 6 of those tiles. You'll shuffle those up and you'll randomly give 1 to each player, which they put in their middle press, and the ones that are not given to players get placed back in the supply. Next, you're going to locate the initial cards that look like this. You're always going to use the one that has the first player on there, and you'll use as many as there are players. So for 3 players, that other one would go back in the box. We would shuffle these up and randomly give them to each player. Players will just put them next to their board, and they'll keep them there for the whole game, and if you're the first player, you'll be the first player the entire game. This next step you may want to just set up and wait until the end of the video once you know more about the strategy of the game, because there's going to be some strategy in selecting tiles. What you can do is take these 12 vintage tiles, and again, if you're going to skip this, just leave them like this for now. Now these are double-sided. Now if you're playing a 2-player game, both players will get the goals tile that looks like this, and I'm going to place it right here where the 2-player slot is. Then additionally, you'll follow all these steps that you'll do in a multiplayer game as well. You'll turn all those vintage tiles over so the blue side is showing, shuffle them up, and each player will take 3 of these. From the 3 you've taken, you're going to select 1 of them and place it in the bottom row of your action board under the corresponding action type by icon. So for example, I could take this one. Now, I will take these 2 and pass them to the player to the left, which means I'm going to get 2 more from the player to my right. From these 2, I'm going to select 1 of them to keep the green vintage side up and place it next to here, right as it shows. The other one I will flip over and place here. This is now a strength tile. We'll talk about how these work later. Again, you won't know the strategy of this yet, so you can do this after you watch the video. Each player also gets 4 coins. These are actually francs, but we'll just call them coins to keep things simple. The object of the game is to score the most points at the end of the game, but you'll also be adding to those points how far up you are on the prestige track. These will actually convert to points at the end of the game. We'll talk about how you get prestige and points throughout this video. The game is played over multiple rounds, with each round players taking turns in a clockwise order. On your turn, you're going to choose an action, then most of the time you're going to perform that action, and then you're going to end your turn. When choosing an action, you're going to select one of the 6 actions on your board, and you're going to move the token up 1, like this for that action. So if I want to do the harvest action, which is this, I would move that up 1 like this. An important part about this board is you'll see that there's a certain amount of coins on the left and a certain numbers here on the right. Now this is important because 3 of the actions actually cost coins in order to do them, 3 of them do not. But in any regards, whenever you're paying to do an action, it's always the lowest row that you have any token in. So right now, it's going to cost me 1 to do any of those 3 actions. Now the strength of that action has to do with where the right side is for the action that you've selected. So I selected this, I moved it up. It's going to be a cost of 1, but the strength of this, in this case, is 1, but you can see as they go up as you get later in the game and move different actions up. So we chose this action. Now, most of the time you're going to perform this action, there's something else you could do after this step that we'll go over later. But in this case, we chose the action, we moved it up. Now we're going to perform that action, which is the harvest action. Again, because it's one of the 3 that has the costs, we are going to pay the cost, the lowest spot that we have any tokens. In this case, we're going to pay 1 coin back to the supply. And also notice the strength for our action is, in this case, 1. So from the bag, you're going to grab a certain amount of grapes based on the strength. Our strength is 1, so we're just going to get 1 grape from here. But if we had a strength of 2 or 3, we would get 2 or 3 grapes from here. You're then going to take that grape, and if you drew more than 1 grape, you can decide which one you're going to place first. You'll place the other ones in this same turn in just a moment. So you'll select the grape, and you'll place it in one of the orthogonal spots next to another grape. Diagonal does not count. So let's say we placed it like this. Then, not counting the grape you just placed, you're going to look at all 8 spaces that are surrounding the grape that you placed. You're going to choose one of the 3 grape varieties, and you're going to get a harvest tile of that type depending on the amount of grapes that are there. So we don't count this one, but we look all the way around. We have this, this, and this. One of each of the 3 grape types. So we could grab a tile of one of those 3 types, and because there's only one of each of them, we would just grab a power of 1. So let's say we grabbed this one here. Now you don't place that yet. If you had more grapes, because your strength was higher than 1, you would then place those other grapes now too and do the same things. Now, if there were more than 3 of a grape type that were surrounding the grape you placed, you still just get a 3. You can never get more than a 3. However, if you did get, say, a 2 tile, but there were no 2 tiles left, you could take a 1 tile and a 1 modifier and place those together. Now let's say instead of us placing it here, we had placed it here. We'd look at everywhere surrounding, which are all the 8 spots. We see 1 green and 2 blacks. Remember, you never count the one you placed. So I could get one that corresponds with this grape as a power of 2, or the green Chardonnay, which is a power of 1. So that's how that works. Now, if you're placing a grape and you cover either the silver coin or one of the accessory tiles, you take those and you place them in front of you. We'll talk about what these do later. Also, there are other ways to boost this that we'll go over later as well. Now, once you've done that for every grape and you've gotten the harvest tiles, you're now going to place them. Now, you're not forced to place them. If there's a tile that you got that you didn't want, you could place it back in the supply, but usually you'll want to place them. Now, there are 3 presses here. Here is a barrel known as a champagne tile. Here is a harvest tile that we started with. When you place one of these, each press can hold up to 3 of these harvest tiles, but they can only hold 1 of each type of grape. So I couldn't put another Pinot Noir here because there already was one, for example. You also cannot place it into a press that already has a bottle or a barrel. These are known as champagne tokens because these have already been pressed. Think of it as you're harvesting the grapes, you're putting them in the press at some point, which I'll show you in a minute. We're going to press this and create things with it like barrels or bottles. So because this already has barrels or bottles, we can't mix them together. In the rare case that there's no grapes in the bag, you simply point at one of the grapes on the vineyard and you calculate it and get the tile as normally calculated. Now, each of these actions has a spot for a vintage tile that you draft at the beginning of the game. Now, let's say this was the one I had selected. Because I did this action, I performed it, this is basically enhancing that. And that allows you to, when you place a grape, like if we place this one, not only looking around, you also can count the one that you placed, which you normally can't do. So I could say, hey, I want a value of 2 for the Chardonnay because that matches with the green grapes. Now, normally it would end your turn and it would go to the next player clockwise, but I'm going to go through all the other actions. Now, so let's go over the Cellar Action. Let's say I took that, I moved that up. I'm going to take the Cellar Action. My lowest is here. It costs 1, and I'm at a strength of 1. Now, when activating the presses in your cellar, you're going to activate a certain amount of these depending on the strength. In this case, we have a strength 1, so we'll be able to activate 1 press, but you might be able to activate more if you have a higher strength for the Cellar Action. Now, for each of the presses that you're going to activate, in this case just this one, we get to decide whether we want to put them into bottles or barrels. Now, the first time you make bottles, you have to pay a cost. In this case, the bottles show you have to pay a coin. And it's only the first time per turn. So if I was doing multiple presses, it's just the first time per turn I'd have to do that. If I was going to make a barrel, see this little worker here next to the barrel, I would take the worker from the press, basically gets used up, and he goes into the champagne house there, the maison. Now remember, if we were making bottles and we had to pay, if our actions were up higher, you may have to pay more because, again, this is the cost. The lowest of your lowest action disc on any of these is going to be the cost. So for example, if it looked like this, the cost would be 2 in order to make the first bottles. Then we're going to calculate the champagne value. So we're going to add up the values here. Remember, there may have been some modifiers on there, maybe if we were out of tokens and such. But in this case, we have 1 and 2. Now this shows that each of the presses have a different bonus. This one is the first one you do here. If it's barrels, you'll get +1 in this press. If it's bottles, you get 2. And if it's bottles in this one, you'd get 3. Again, it's only the first time that you do it in this press this turn. So here we're going to do this. So we're going to make these two. It's 1 plus 2 is right there, but because it's the first bottle that we're making here, it's going to be another 2. So that's going to give us 4. Now you may notice that there is no 4 here. So you have to take the next lowest one, which is 3. Remember, these are double-sided, so I can simply just take this and flip it over to the bottle side. So I've placed that bottle here. Now, you always get to do it twice for each press. So in this case, I have the same grapes here, and I get to decide whether I want to do a second bottle or a barrel. Now, if I do a barrel, again, because it would be my first barrel, I would need to now pay this. So I could do that, or I could do another bottle. And in that case, I wouldn't have to pay the cost because I already did it before in this press this turn. Now, if I did do bottles, remember, not only do I not have to pay, in this case, the 1 coin in order to do it, but I also don't get the bonus either because these bonuses are always the first time you do it in that press that turn. So I wouldn't get the extra 2, so I would just get a bottle of 2, which there is no bottle, so it would just be a bottle of 1. So do I do that and not pay, get the bonus, but I don't have to pay? Or do I pay the worker to try to get the barrel, but still, even though I get the barrels, I'm only getting a value of 2. So since I've already paid the cost, let's go with a second bottle. Now remember, because we didn't have the bonus, it really was 2, and since there's no 2 tile, we had to get the one below it, which is 1. And you remove those harvest tokens from your press and you place them back in the supply. Now, the vintage effect, if you had that for the Cellar Action, when you produce champagne in a barrel, that is increased by 1 for one of the presses, but you could produce 2 barrels from one press and gain that bonus both times. So now that you've brought in grapes in the harvest and you've pressed them into bottles and you already had a barrel, let's go to the action of selling or sales. So that's this one here. It doesn't cost anything to do, but again, the strength in this case is going to be 1. Now with that strength of 1 allows it to sell 1 time. Now there's 4 different markets and they are at the end of different routes. This is the north route, east, south, and west down here. So we can look at these and we can sell at these. Now these allow you to sell different things. Like this card in London, they want barrels. Strasbourg wants barrels. Wien wants bottles. And this pile always just has purchase orders, which means you can sell either bottles or barrels. Now that market card and the tile of the scoring is kept on the board. I've just brought over here to facilitate easier teaching. So for our single sale, we can sell one of these bottles because they want bottles. Now notice this, here's our 3 presses. We cannot sell from our right press. That's okay, we don't want to sell from there. We'll get a 2-point bonus if we sell from the middle and a 1 point if we sell from the left. Well, that's great because we're going to be selling from the middle anyways. Maybe we plan this out. We'll pick one of these 2 to sell. Now here we have a value of 3. And this is going to give us an additional value of 2, so we're at 5. Now, we look at this initial card that we have, and it shows us that if it's 1 through 5, we'll just score the top one, in this case, which would be 1 point. If we scored 6 through 10, we would get 2 points. If we scored 11 or more, we'd get 8 points. Now, so we're 1 short. We're basically at 5. However, remember there's accessory tokens out in the vineyard. Maybe in an earlier turn, we placed the grape here, taking this accessory. And now, not only do we have the 3 plus the 2 because it's the middle press, we also have this because this market wanted that accessory to go along with it. That's great. So we could now have a total of 6, which is now going to get us an additional point. So now we would get 2 points. And you would immediately move on the score track. Now you discard that accessory token out of the game because it's a gray one, and you would keep the card in front of you from the market that you did because it has some icons on it possibly that might help you at endgame scoring that we'll go over later. And the bottles that we sold simply goes back to the supply, and again, they're double-sided, so it doesn't really matter which side you put up. Now if you had the sales vintage token, it enhances that action by allowing you to take the top card of any market deck and put it at the bottom of that pile. Now keep in mind, since all these decks are face up, as soon as you take that card, the new one is right there face up for you. Now there are more ways to increase your sales, like doing things on these routes, but I'll go over that later. Now let's say we're going to do the goals action. Let's say we move this up, and now we are at a strength of 2, for example. So because we have a strength of 2, we can take any 2 of these cards that are face up. Now, if you had a strength of 1, you would just take 1. Now you'll always only keep 1 bonus card, like this one for example. If you have 3 or 4 of these champagne tiles with the bottle side in your presses, you'll get 7 or 12 points. Now you're only keeping 1 card. What do you do with the other ones? If you have more than 1 card, the ones you don't keep, you get the immediate bonus of what's below. Like this case, it gives us a modifier, and if we do get a modifier like this from a bonus, we have to put it in an empty press. Now we'll talk about how and when you score these gold cards a little bit later. Any of those gold cards you use just for the bottom bonus go in a discard pile, and then you refill. If this draw deck's ever empty, shovel the discard pile, make a new draw pile. There's also a separate gold card leaflet in the game, and it tells you what each and every one of these gold cards do. Now if you have the vintage tile for goals, you look at your strength, in this case 2, you would draw that many extra cards from the gold deck to choose from so you have more choices and you won't need to refill after you take it. Now keep in mind that some gold cards will get you certain points depending on how many flags you have, and there's different flags you may see in some of the market cards. And above of every market card, it also will show you what the distribution is, like this one has twice as many barrels than bottles, and there's American flags found here. Where this market has twice as many bottle cards than barrels, and this has a different flag in it, for example. Now so far we've only talked about using the worker in your presses to create barrels, but as you remember with setting up, we had plenty of workers and there's a lot of things you can do with these that do different things for you. So now we're going to jump into the different things that these workers can do for you. And with that being said, we're going to move up in the logistics action. Right now we have a strength of 1, so let's talk about that. Now with that strength of 1, we could take 1 worker from our supply. If we had strength of 3, we could take up to 3 from here. Now if you run out of workers here, you can actually take them from other places on the board that I'm going to be showing you where you can place those now. Now in addition to the number that you can take with the strength from your supply, you can also take as many as you want from your champagne house. Remember, they get up here by creating barrels. They go from your presses to up here, so maybe we want to take both of those, that one and the one for my supply. Now you can place them on the different routes as we were talking about how these lead to the different market cards when we sold. So you could place them in any routes. I could place one, say, here and here. You always start from sort of the center and work your way out. This is the first 2 spots here. I could place one there and one here, for example. But let's say it looked like this. I could put one here. You go to the next open spot. And let's say I place my second one like this. The reason why this is important is you can see that as these lead to the different markets, in addition to all the other points that I showed you you'd also get points to where your furthest worker is to this spot. So here you see a section here with this yellow line and this yellow line, and anywhere in this section, you'd get 2 extra points. If you make it all the way to the end, you'd get 3. If your furthest is in this section, you'd get 1. So in this case, as far as here, I would get 2 additional points when I sold to this, in addition to all the other points that I showed you how you score when you sell. But then from that route, you need to remove half of your workers, rounded down. In this case, it would just be 1 of these. You'd place it back into your champagne house, and you'd get 1 coin for each of the different routes that you had to take one of your workers off of. Another place that you can place a worker is out into the vineyard on top of a grape that doesn't already have another worker. Then when you take the harvest action, you place a grape. Again, you're looking around, all the way around it to see which grape you want to harvest. And if you harvest one that has a worker on it of yours, you get an additional power. Like in this case, I would normally just get a power of 1 for this Pinot Noir, but because I have this here, I'd get an additional 1, so I'd get a power of 2 for that Pinot Noir. So for example, that Power 2 Pinot Noir, let's put it here, and that worker that we used goes back into our champagne house. And earlier we saw that paying with a worker from your press up to your champagne house is how you did your first barrel. Well, one other place that you can place your worker is to place them in your press, and we've already seen how that works once they get there. Now, if you have the vintage token for that action logistics, you can skip one space when placing a worker on the route. So if we wanted to place one on this route, we could skip this empty space, and we could go just like that, getting us 3 extra points when we sell to this market. So let's talk about the last action we haven't talked about yet, is the village. Again, we would move this up, and we would take it. Now, this has a strength of 1. Now, let's show you something. Earlier in the game, we had a vintage tile and a strength tile there. As soon as all of your discs are at least at this, you get to take this vintage tile and place it under the action that corresponds with that vintage tile, and we've already gone over what all these do. However, let's say it looked like this, and we're about to perform the village action. Now, all of our discs are at least at the 2, which allows us to get the strength tile, and we could put it under any one of these. In fact, well, if we do this, it's going to allow us to now, any strength that you're at, it always adds 1 to it. Now, you can kick out a tile that's already there, but you're losing that, so it's not usually the most efficient thing to do, but this is going to give you +1 strength to whatever this action is when you take it. Also keep in mind that because this has the coin there, we do have to pay for this village, and in this case we would have to pay 2 in order to do this action with that strength of 2. Now when you go to the village, you can choose from some different options, and the amount of options you can choose from depend on your strength. So if we had a strength of 2, we could choose any 2 of these options, but you can never repeat the same action at the village in the same turn. And these options are, you can take one of these top different blue accessory tokens, and we already showed you how those work, adding the points when you sell a certain thing to a market when they need that specific accessory. You could also take the top of one of these 2, placing it in your presses using the placement rules as I've already described. You could decide to remove one of your champagne tiles of either type, either bottles or barrels. If you do that, you get 2 points. You could remove any 2 of them to get 5 points. Or you could take the bonuses at the bottom of any 2 of those gold cards. Now when you take the bonus on any bottom of these 2, you don't remove the cards, and all the explanations are in that leaflet, the same one that described the gold cards. And if you have the vintage token for the village action, once per turn you can move one of your workers from anywhere on the game board or on your individual board to any other area on the board following the normal placement rules. Now up until this point, we've been choosing an action, moving the disc up, and then performing that action. But once in a while, if you need some money, after you choose an action and move it up like this, instead of performing that action, you can lay off workers. And when doing that, you're going to look at the strength of the disc that you just moved up to. This allows us to remove 2 workers from pretty much anywhere on the board and put them back into the supply, taking 1 coin for each of those workers. Now, in addition to the normal part of your turn, you can take 1 possible free action per turn. Now, one of the things you could do is shown right here. You could take any single champagne tile from your board, put it back to the supply in order to gain 1 coin. Now earlier we talked about gaining a scorecard and how to get those. Now once per turn as one of those free actions, you can only do 1 of these, remember, you can score the gold card, you flip it over so you cannot score it again, and you get those points immediately. Another possibility for your single free action on your turn is you can pay 5 coins to move up on the prestige track. Now this track is important because at the end of the game, you're going to get points equal to wherever you're at, but as you cross lines, they're going to be multipliers of 1, 2, and 3 of the amount of crowns that you get throughout the game, which are also going to turn into points. We'll show you more of that detail in just a bit. Now speaking of prestige, you can also move up this track in different ways. 3 other ways other than paying the 5 for that free action. One of them is when you take the Cellar Action, if you get a champagne value of 12 or more, so when you're selling, if you get to 12, now a lot of times you're gonna need bonuses in order to get that, then you'll gain prestige. If, when performing a sales action, you obtain the final champagne value of 16 or more, now that will get you up there as well. And also, if when performing the Cellar Action with the strength of 3 and producing champagne in 3 different presses, you'll also get prestige. Now every time you get prestige, you move up 1 on this track, then you flip any one of these tokens, and then you take any one of them. And a lot of them have to do with giving you bonuses and such. You can take it and you can use it immediately, or you can save it for later. And that you do that once for every spot you move up on the prestige track. Now the last possible free action, remember you can only take one on your turn, is called popping the cork. You would take your initial card and you would flip it over. Now by doing this, you pop the cork and you move any one of your action discs up one. Now if you ever move any one of your action discs up to the top spot, and you place it on the leftmost open spot on this end game track on the bottom left of the board. Now anytime you do this, you get 2 points. Now, if when placing this, it reaches the player count that you're playing with, that triggers sort of the end of the game. The current round is completed, and then one more final round takes place. But after it gets to this, then anyone else placing discs here do not get the 2 points. Then you go to final scoring. In final scoring, again, you're going to take where you are on your prestige track and immediately get points for that on the score tracker. Then you also look at the multiplier that you're at. Like here, I'm past the 3, so it's a 3 times multiplier for crowns. And you look at possibly your initial card if you didn't cork it, and any other cards you may have gotten that have those, like market cards. So in this case, I have 3 crowns, multiplied by my 3 multiplier, I get 9 more points on the score track. And whoever has the most points is the winner. If it's tied, whoever has the most money, and if it's still tied, the one closest to first player order wins. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into Dom Pierre quicker than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you'd like to see all of the final components and all the different pledge levels available, you can click the link below me in the description of this video. Now, that's going to take you directly to the Kickstarter project page, and I'm sure that R&R Games would love your support.